I have been working on K through 12 education reform now for 20 years. I started in 1991. And if there is one thing I've learned, it's that this is a long march. It's a marathon. You have to pace yourself. And there are periods of time when you are really running up steep hills. And then there are other times when you really do have momentum and wind at your backs. I feel that we are at such a period right now. There are a lot of things that I think are coming together which could provide breakthroughs. But we all know that this is not easy work. The second thing that I've learned is that there is no silver bullet. There is no single solution. And we have seen the idea and notion of what appeared to be unqualified reforms that looked like they were absolutely going to be the solution for this important but overwhelming problem of K through 12 education reform that we face. So I urge you all to think about this in a fairly broad manner on how we approach the problem. And it's more like triage on a patient that requires intervention in the emergency room. And when you have a patient who's sick, you don't just focus on one thing. You focus on as many things as you can to try and stabilize that patient and then to bring that patient to health. I think we're fortunate that we have a number of tools in our toolkit. We've heard a great deal about blended learning at this conference, and I think that's a very exciting opportunity that really is presenting itself and manifesting itself in new and important ways. Clearly, charters also have played a very important role on the national landscape in education reform. And we also have vouchers and tax credits. I think when we see the impact of reforms in states like Florida, and then we begin to look elsewhere around the country at other governors who are willing to take risks, be bold, and then supported by legislators such as we have with us today who are willing to put their necks out and risk their political futures because they think it's the right thing to do to be bold on reform, that we begin to see some very interesting things happen. And we are very fortunate also, as we have heard today and over the last couple days, that we have 50 states, we have laboratories, we have superintendents out there such as we just saw, who are also willing to be bold and take the kinds of initiatives that will be needed if we are to really make substantial changes. So these are a few lessons that I have learned, and the area that I have focused on has been vouchers and tax credits, even though I'm a big believer in other types of reforms. But those areas, and we have seen times when it has been very difficult to get legislation passed, and we've seen times when we've been able to do a great deal. This year, 2011, is an absolute banner year. We have never had a year when we've had the kinds of legislative successes that we've had. We've had 10 new pieces of legislation passed across the country, and we've seen the reinstatement of the Washington, D.C. program. So this is absolutely really breathtaking what has occurred this year. And I think we have to attribute that to a lot of work that went in politically to creating the changes that occurred in 2010. And that wasn't just what happened at the ballot box in 2010, but it was laying the groundwork up to that. And when you look at states like Florida, where you've really seen a transformation in the number of Democrats who have joined Republicans in this effort. When you look at the kind of leadership that we now have in states like Indiana and in governors and in Wisconsin as well, and I think what we will see in New Jersey, this is really, really an exciting time. To give you a sense of the numbers of that, in vouchers and tax credit programs in the country today, we have about 200,000 mostly very poor children who are enrolled in those programs. And this year we added about 600,000 seats on that base. So that's just transformational. So with that, I would like to introduce some of these warriors out there who are going to tell us about the work they've been doing in their states, some of the battle scars they've had, and what the future portends. So let me start with Gary Simrill from South Carolina, who is a member of the House of Representatives there. Gary.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here representing the right coast of the United States of America. I come from the very red state of South Carolina. It's interesting, though, that we're here still battling for school choice when you look at the redness of our state, and I realize that school choice is not a partisan issue, but it usually, in most cases, is led by Republican legislators. I couldn't help but notice the other night, Governor Bush quoted one of my non-American heroes, Winston Churchill, when he said the quote of "never, never, never, never give up." One of the other quotes of Churchill, which is not widely known, but it is, if you find yourself going through hell, keep going. And I think that we find ourselves really on the cusp of what's happening, and I look at South Carolina in particular. I've been in office 19 years. I was elected when I was 25 years old. School choice wasn't even talked about back then, at least not in our state. We started dealing with charter schools right after that in 1993, 94. We are just now to the point where we have state-sponsored charter schools. And so you look at this, as mentioned, not a sprint, but a marathon. When we get to that point, you realize just what it takes. As I start looking at school choice and the battles that we have faced, in the time we started talking about this in my state, we went from having a Democrat in the governor's office to a Democratic Senate to a Republican House. We now have all three and have had for some time, both the House, the Senate, and the governor's office being Republican controlled. The problem that I see in what we have done is really the old adage of death by 1,000 cuts, because we would seek to do what was right by the children, and many times we get off base with this debate because it becomes more about education versus the child. And I think it's incumbent upon us to redirect that back. And I look at South Carolina, and we have 46 counties in our state. We have 85 school districts. We spend on average $11,500 per student in the state of South Carolina. Of course, of those districts, some are more than others. What we talked about in doing with a tax credit was the state's portion was about $4,500 or so, close to $5,000, between $4,500 and $5,000, sending half of that money back, allowing that kind of tax credit if you chose to send your child to a non-public school. In doing so, what we found ourselves, and this goes back to the death by 1,000 cuts, but we found ourselves competing, especially when we got into tough economic times in 2000. 2007 was great for our state. That would have been a perfect time to pass this. 2008 comes, all of a sudden you've got budgetary crises that are going on, and so the educational side would say, this is not the time to do that. You know, we can't, if you can't support public, how in the world are you going to do the other? Well, we failed, though, in pointing out what the obvious was, and that is it really is not a cost burden, it is a cost savings. But I think we failed in many instances in how to get that message out. The other part of what we have done is to try to bring about as people are elected. You run for office, you go out and you're great campaigners, obviously, because you came in first. The difference, though, when it comes to governing is you start getting the emails and the calls from really the educrat society, we'll call them. They are not big in number, but they are very loud. And so many people are taken aback by that, and they say, oh, well, you know, let's back off of what we're doing just a hair. I think in that instance, though, we need to have a broader spectrum, and I appreciate, you know, what you've talked about in this, because I think as we look forward, let's recognize the numbers of people that actually support this. We had a poll in South Carolina done by a university, and it showed half the folks, when asked, did support school choice. So I look at that from that standpoint. The other is to get everybody on board. You know, is it executive branch pushed, or is it from the grassroots, or is it legislative? It really takes all three. Unfortunately, when we had a person in the governor's office who supported school choice, his personality didn't get along so much with the legislature. So from the outside, you really couldn't see that. Inside the Beltway, that was the case. And so in our state, unfortunately, we had personalities actually stopping the cause of what we were attempting to do. So I'll stop there, but just to tell you that South Carolina, you look from the outside and say, one state that should have school choice already passed, it's us, and we don't, and there are reasons why. I will tell you this, though, the other part of that is, where does this bill go? Does it go to an education committee that sometimes is more controlled by those that are not as favorable to school choice? Well, it deals with money. Shouldn't it rather go to a finance committee where you talk about the dollars and cents of it? And I can tell you this past year, we did finally get it to education, from education to finance, and we did pass it out of the finance committee, and we lost by one vote on the floor. This year I have with me the chairman of our finance committee. We call it Ways and Means, Brian White, and he's in the audience with us. So we look forward to 2012 of being a very great year.
You going to get that vote in 2012 then?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Right, Mr. White?
Rick Murphy is a member of the House in Arizona, Senate, excuse me, in Arizona. And Rick, you want to tell us a little bit about what's going on in Arizona and the work you've been doing?
Sure, thank you very much. When I first ran it was the House when I first ran, I ran against a non-school choice supporting incumbent of the same party at that, because I had believed in school choice before I even knew what it was. I was a product of blended education. I went to private school for the first half, and I went to public school for the second half, and saw the stark differences. And if it wasn't for the preparation I got at the private schools, and finding myself bored at the beginning of my public school education, if it wasn't for the accelerated classes I got there, I wouldn't be prepared to do what I do. And so that really kind of set the stage for the fundamental understanding that we are not serving our children well, broad spectrum, with the public education system, and we need to change the focus from a adult-focused perspective to a child-focused perspective. And there's been much discussion about that at this conference and today. And I'm so grateful that everybody in this room, I think, falls into that category of realizing that if we don't change the focus, we're not going to change the results. And so that kind of created, you know, my willingness to kind of go to the wall on some of this stuff. And, you know, I heard it mentioned earlier that this was a knife fight in a dark room. Well, I'm a hemophiliac. If I had known that, I don't know if I would have signed up for this. But so far, it's worked out pretty well. So in my first term, we were able to pass. We had Governor Janet Napolitano at that time. You probably all know who she is now and realize how liberal she is. The idea of getting school choice advancements and significant ones accomplished while she was in charge was a daunting idea. And Steve Yarborough is another one of my colleagues who is fighting the good fight in this area in particular, and was at that time in 05 and 06. And we actually were able to accomplish getting the first, that I know of, the first new voucher program signed into law by a Democrat governor. And that was myself and another member ran two bills One was for displaced students, which is foster care students, and the other was for disabled students. And so we got those into place. We got some students in the program. They were doing remarkably. Some of these students that had autism and different things were making gains that they never had been able to make before because their parents were able to put them in the place that they were going to flourish, rather than having some educrat decide what should be done with them and what was convenient for the adults. Well, we have a Blaine Amendment in Arizona. Actually, I think we kind of have two. And they're pretty bad as these things go. They're pretty strong. And so eventually, as they went through the court system, they were ruled unconstitutional. And so we went back to the drawing board, and first we did an emergency measure to save these kids and keep them from having to go back where they came from and fail. And we passed a new tax credit called Lexi's Law, named after one of the students, who to rescue them and provide funding to keep them in their choice schools. So we got that accomplished. And then we got to thinking, and Matt Ladner was at the Goldwater Institute back then, and we kicked around some ideas. Okay, how can we work around this? Well, one of the opposing council members in that Supreme Court hearing, and one of the justices, had a little conversation during the hearing about a what if. What if private school was not the only choice? What if there were other choices? Would it still be unconstitutional? Well, no, says the opposing counsel. It would be fine. Really? Okay. So we came up with education savings accounts, similar to a health savings account, only it's education focused. And the way we designed it, and we actually got the bill passed this last session, and it's enacted, and we now have 300 or so, I think, students in the first class, if you will. We give parents in an account that's only for educational purposes 90% of what they would otherwise get, and this is only for right now for disabled students. Their parents can choose tutoring, their parents can choose digital learning, their parents could choose private school, they could choose whatever mix and match of educational services fits their child's needs to get them where they need to get. And of course it's been, challenged, and so now we're going to wind our way through the court system on this again. But nevertheless, we are undaunted, and one of my mottos, and it kind of falls along the lines of some of Winston Churchill's quotes, is, if you never quit, you never lose. You may have setbacks, but you haven't lost because you haven't quit. And so whatever the outcome of this is, we will keep fighting, and we will find a way at some point to provide choice, as far as I'm concerned, for every child in the state of Arizona. And I am so grateful that, it's been a kind of a fight, and across the country there's been fits and starts of school choice advancements and setbacks and different things like that. But in every successful reform movement, there comes a point where synergy starts to build and you reach a tipping point. And I think that we're either there or very close to it, not just in Arizona, but nationally. And so being a part of this is really exciting, and it's a real honor and a privilege. And so I look forward to answering any other questions later on.
Thanks, Rick. Joe is from Florida. We've heard a lot about Florida at this conference, and I think one of the real opportunities that presents is the learning that we can all take from that. But also, I think, Joe, it'd be great to hear from you as to the role you played in making that happen, how the stars lined up in Florida, and how you're continuing to advance the football down the field, not resting on your laurels there.
Great, thank you very much. And I'll just talk about that briefly. I think you're talking about our corporate tax scholarship program, which began in 2001. And I'll just make one point on it. I really think the reason why it's succeeding is because we've acknowledged the fact that we're in the persuasion business, not in the insult, hector, and lecture business. And so when I first did the bill in 2001, every Democrat in the House voted against it. Several Republicans voted against it. The minority leader of the House, I was a freshman at the time, while we were having the debate, walked over and gave me a stuffed pig with lipstick on and said, if it's still a pig, it's dressed up. And I know what you do. I don't know what you're supposed to do with a stuffed animal that somebody hands you while you're talking, so I set it down. I wanted to throw it at him, but I decided that wouldn't be good form. So let's fast forward to 2009. I was elected to the Senate. We did a huge expansion. It started out as a $67 million program. It's now over $200 million. We have waiting lists of thousands of students that want to participate. Because we've constantly been winsome and been trying to win people over to our side, several African American Democratic state senators voted for the expansion and support it. The Democratic minority leader, who's African American, who actually represents part of Tallahassee, our state capital, I went to him and said, it'd be a real honor if you would present the closing. First of all, he's a better speaker than I am. Present the closing on this bill. And Al Lawson, who was a college basketball player, very, very impressive gentleman, 6'8", the Democratic minority leader did the closing argument on a giant expansion of school choice, because we were constantly working it, and because in the end, the students who are taking advantage of the programs, primarily in Florida, are minorities and people who are locked in failing schools, and so many of his constituents are actually in the program. So that's a success that we've had. Now, what I wanted to briefly talk about, in life and in politics and policy, it's always important to get off to a good impression. A friend of mine named Darren Steele was running for judge, and he was knocking on doors. I know a lot of you run for office, so you're doing the knocking on doors in the summer. And he approaches the house, the garage door's open, he walks in and he pushes what he thinks is the doorbell by the thing, and it's actually the garage door to come down. And so he quickly thinks that it's probably not a good idea for him to be in someone's garage unannounced, not as an invited guest. So he's a pretty athletic guy. And as it's going down, he thinks quickly, and he does this MacGyver-like barrel roll underneath the garage as it's shutting, and he leaps to his feet, and the owner of the house is standing right there and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Hi, I'm Darren Steele. I'd like to be your next circuit court judge." So, we went all in this session, and Rick's right. They have the educational savings account for students with disabilities. I filed last session all-out education savings accounts, period. It's the boldest, most aggressive parental choice program, if it passed, which it didn't, but in the country. So very briefly, what it does was our FEFP is about $6,873. That's the pool of money that's available. What we did, because I'm an advocate of giving opportunities to all parents who do all different choices, including parents who homeschool. I don't love my children enough to homeschool them, but I support the right of people to homeschool. So what we did, we took, if you wanted to participate in the program, you had to already be in the public school or a kindergartner coming in, so it's revenue neutral and actually saves money. 40% of the money would go to you, 40% would go in a pool, so we had a lottery of private school students and homeschool students that could participate. And similar to what you said, you can spend the money on virtual school, tutoring, books. What I really like is you can, let's say you were homeschooling or making other arrangements, you can put the money into a 529 college savings plan. So can you imagine how exciting it would be for a family that was making another choice to be able to put $2,000 or $3,000 a year from first grade to 12th grade, so that this student knows, you know what, if I keep succeeding and doing well, my parents have already set aside money for me to go to college. What a extraordinary incentive that would be for the student to do well. So we filed the bill. Let me give you the good news. The good news is it passed one committee last session, and it passed 3-0. And one of the yes votes was one of the Democrats on the committee who was a school superintendent, and the unions were there just glaring at him and as if he shouldn't even consider this. And I went up and just said, here's why we ought to do it, and he was persuaded by the argument. Now I will say that even among Republicans, because we're a very Republican state in our legislature, 2-1 in the House and Senate, the majority of Republicans are not yet ready to go all in with educational savings accounts. I'll acknowledge that. I'm in the minority of the minority viewpoint. Now, being a lawyer, I'm used to arguing cases occasionally when I don't win, and the judge goes, I've listened to everything, no, and you can prepare the order denying the relief that you asked for. So I can accept this and work. I want to make 3 quick points though. Well, we also have a Behning amendment, but here's the good news on our Behning amendment. We put it on the ballot for next year to repeal the Behning amendment. It passed the legislature, and it has to pass 60% of our voters to take that out of our Constitution. And so we're on this enormous campaign to talk about the horrific anti-Catholic bias and bigotry that led to that. And so we're trying to get the Behning Amendment out of our Constitution, but that will be on the ballot. Let me make 3 quick points so I don't want to take too much of someone else's time. Here's the 3 things that I offer to you for your consideration or rejection, but these are 3 ideas that I really think are important if we're going to get over the edge on this. Do you know what the #1 argument against educational savings accounts by the unions were? And I'm not making this up. Literally was, if you do this, the students will leave. They will leave the school district in droves. So I did it politely and respectfully, but I just put it right back on them. I said, let me understand this. I apparently have more confidence in public education than you do, because your argument is that the only way you can succeed is to have a hostage situation where you are forcing parents to stay and students to stay in a school. You apparently don't even think as much of your schools as I do, because my children have attended and graduated from public schools. I'm a fan of public schools. I don't throw rocks at you. Go try to teach a class for a day in a public school or any school and see what it's like. So I don't come at this as anti-public school. So when they make that argument that everyone will leave, first I put it right back on them and say, you know, it really saddens me to see you stand up in front of a committee and you have such a poor opinion of public education that you think so little of what you do that you will make the argument that the only reason I sent my kids to public schools because I had to. Well, you know what? I can send my kids to private school if I want to. I could have lots of other options, and I choose to. And so I put it right back on them because I don't think we should take that as a good argument. The second thing we need to do, in my opinion, is and I did it very politely and respectfully, but when the union came up and representative kept saying, our children this, and this is not good for our children, I said, you know, I don't mean disrespectfully, but these are not your children. We do not have a communal interest in children. There's no community possessory interest in children. Our children are the number of children that you have, and as long as you don't abuse or neglect them, God bless America, do what you want. I'm very libertarian leaning. You can, you know, within reason, do your thing. But I think we should push back on this our children. So people come up and say, I have all the children of Florida. No. The children of Florida are the children that are your children. Don't tell other people how to raise their children. There's no anointed class of people that you're the ones who are going to tell other people who apparently aren't as bright and capable as you how to raise their children. I don't accept that argument. Then the last point is, and I'm sure there's a good counter argument to this, but I haven't heard it yet. I happen to be involved in healthcare appropriations, so I use this analogy. When they come up and say, we can't do this, you must go to the government school, this is terrible, I say, you know, in Florida we spend $22 billion a year on Medicaid. And if I get sick, I can go to the Holy Cross Hospital in Fort Lauderdale, which is Catholic. Or I can go to the Mount Sinai Hospital, which is Jewish. Or maybe I don't like crucifixes or Stars of David and I want to go to a secular hospital, then I can go to a tenant-owned hospital or anywhere. And then no one thinks anything of this. No one would say, oh, you are on Medicaid, you are poor, you must go to the government hospital. You have all kinds of choices. No one says that we're supporting religion by sending checks to Mount Sinai and to Good Samaritan and to these hospitals. And so how is education so much different than healthcare? And why have we decided that we're going to have this one place where we just don't allow people any choice at all? And there may be a good argument for that, but so far that's been compelling to some legislators who are a little resistant to go as far as I want to go, because it really isn't logical when you think about the choices we give in every other area of government to use religious-based organizations or non-religious based. So my goal this session is, I've refiled the bill. Looking at it realistically, the odds of it passing are less than 50%. However, my goal this session is maybe to get it out of 2 or 3 committees and potentially get it sent to the floor. But in closing, I think if we frame the issue as choice for parents, I don't mind if people say school choice, but school choice hits some people the wrong way. I say parental choice, because most people believe that parents should be in control of how their children are educated and how their children are raised. I think the momentum is on our side, and I think more and more people of both parties support giving options to parents. So that's where we are in Florida.
Joe, thanks.
Thanks.
Bob, this has been a breakthrough year in Indiana. Congratulations. Could you talk a little bit, though, about what it took to get to this point, and then how you were able to get such really sweeping legislation passed? I don't think anyone would consider this to be incremental type legislation.
Well, thank you very much. It's also an honor to be here, and I want to thank my colleagues from Indiana. I have a couple of committee members, Cindy Noe from my committee, Jean Lysing from Senate, and my counterpart, Dennis Cruz, who's the chairman of House Senate Education here as well. It wasn't an easy roadmap to follow. We're very blessed. We have a governor who's very progressive, Governor Daniels. You've all met Tony Bennett, who is never short on words or having an opinion on something. Tony was a very pleasant change for us, at least for conservatives who wanted to see school choice have an opportunity. Our previous superintendent of public instruction had been was a Republican, had been in office for 12 years. Tony came to us and was an advocate of change and reform, which has been a true blessing and helpful in the state. We also had several business leaders. A gentleman by the name of Fred Klipsch, who, if any of you have heard of Klipsch Speakers, he owned Klipsch Speakers, became a large advocate, became very involved in the state several years ago, and saw the way the teachers union controlled, especially the Indiana House. And his commitment to trying to change that was something that really has made a difference, as well as the Freeman Foundation, American Federation for Children. All were very involved in this state, especially in the last election cycle. And with the election turnaround, we had been in the control of the Democrats over the last decade. I've been in 2 decades now, and we've had a majority in the House twice for the Republicans, a parajority once. And we were able to get 60 Republicans in the House, and the Senate has a supermajority, so they really don't have an issue. But it's really, school choice should not be a partisan issue. It should be what's best for children. And we had a very comprehensive plan, and I believe that that is one of the reasons we were successful in Indiana, is that we didn't focus just on one issue, but we focused on what, as Tony has told you, the comprehensive plan doing teacher evaluation, expansion of charters, school choice. We had an early graduation bill, parent trigger. We try to do as much as we possibly can, and made it very difficult for people to target one issue or another. But it was very tenuous, because even though you have, as several of the gentlemen up here have said, even though you have maybe a caucus, it's of one party, they don't all have one thought process, and they're not all in agreement. The bill ended up, the governor had given me the charge of making sure it was revenue neutral. Indiana is not different than any other state of the union. We have financial issues that we had to deal with, although we are blessed. We actually now have $1 billion surplus, because we have a governor who's very judicious and careful with the spending, but he wanted to make sure we didn't open up and have a bill that costs money. So the bill's created in such a way that it's not open to students in kindergarten, which was what many of our advocates had wanted, because we have 1 million kids in Indiana public schools today, about 100,000 in private schools, and the governor did not want to all of a sudden open this door to those 100,000 shifting over to state support, as opposed to trying to incentivize and create some new opportunities and real change. So the bill is created in such a way that you now have to be have gone to a public school for 2 consecutive semesters beyond kindergarten. And if you are a parent that wants to make a change, you have an opportunity to go to a private school. We have specifically had high-quality options. So the schools are part of our accountability plan. They have to be A, B, or C schools, so we're not letting just any private school in. It has to be one that wants to participate and be held to our state accountability standards. But then the parents, if you're at free and reduced lunch or below, you get 90% of your state support. Will follow your child to the school. The state of Indiana, we fund all of our general funds obligation to schools. Public schools is funded by the state. Many of your states probably have a blend of property tax and state dollars. Several years ago, under Governor Daniels' leadership, we eliminated all property tax dollars, and it's all state dollars, so we control what goes to schools, and it varies depending on the school corporation, but 90% of it will go to the school of choice if you're at free and reduced lunch. If you're between 100% of free and reduced lunch, 150% of free and reduced lunch, we will give you 50% of that state support from your homeschool corporation. The cap for elementary, the governor was concerned that it could, because we have some school corporations who are spending up to $8,000 to $9,000 per student just in state support. It's capped at $4,500 for elementary, but there's no cap for secondary, so it's wide open as far as that's concerned. Unfortunately, in the House, Democrats, as you probably heard, walked out for 38 days, longest walkout in the country. School choice bill was one of them. Right to work was one of them. One of my other bills, turnaround academies, was one. They were all on the list. One of the ways to get the Democrats back was they wanted caps. And I had talked to the advocates, and they said no problem with the caps they suggested. We have caps of 7,500 kids for the first year, 15,000 for the second, and then the caps disappear totally. The advocate said there's been no voucher program in the country that's had that kind of take-up, so it won't be a problem. We actually have approximately 4,000 kids today on the Indiana voucher, and it passed and became effective law July 1st. So from July 1st, Neil from the Department of Ed is the gentleman, he's in the room as well, is responsible for implementation. So from July 1st to the start of school, we had the largest uptake of a charter school program in the country, as I'm told today. But it has not come without problems as well. We have a Blaine Amendment, a weak Blaine Amendment, but we currently in Indiana have for a long time had a history of providing student support for our institutions of higher ed. We have 29 private colleges, and we have segregated our state student support money and made student support for higher ed available for our private colleges, and we tried to model this legislation so it's kind of similar in the way that the money follows a child. And the teachers union has sued us. We're in the process of dealing with the suit. It ended up going to a Marion County judge who happens to be a Republican friend of mine who children attended a private school in Indianapolis, and he did not give them an injunction against it. He did allow them to have some interrogatories moving forward, but we're optimistic that we're going to be successful in defeating it. The long-term problem will be the impact that the unions will try to have to try to come back and erode the effectiveness of it. The other program that we had in place, Indiana passed in 2009 a tax credit program where we give 50% forgiveness for any contribution to a scholarship granting organization of the person's tax liability. We had capped that at $2.5 million per year for the last 2 years of the biennium. They had not had much uptake. We actually increased it in this bill as well, so that scholarship granting organization has been expanded. We've kind of changed it so it can now go down to smaller institutions. It used to be that it had to be a number of schools coming together. Now it can come down to a small unit as one school creating their own SGO. And if you're a recipient of an SGO scholarship today, you actually have an opportunity to the voucher next year. So it is a way around the one-year commitment to, or 2-semester commitment to the traditional public school. So if you're a recipient of an SGO scholarship today, you can actually, and meet the means test that we put in place, you now will have access to the voucher next year. So we also increased the funding of that, and the SGO actually has higher means testing than the voucher, so there's more people that will have eligibility to that. And we tried to ratchet up the amount of state forgiveness. The bill originally would have moved it up to 90%, but the Senate, in their wisdom, did not believe that should be moved forward, especially Senate Finance Chairman did not like. He hates tax credits and wasn't willing to move it at all. But he believes there's a chance it's going to be found unconstitutional, so he wanted to leave SGOs alive for the moment. But it's come with a lot of, I think we'll find a lot of Republicans having primaries. I know I own my own business, and I own a retail florist business, and on Valentine's, I was having a committee hearing discussing the bill. My LA was up front of the House chamber, gave me an email from one of my school superintendents. The teachers union was going to picket my store 2 days before Valentine's Day. Their goal was to send members into the store, make sure that no customers could come in, to totally close down the business. We leaked it to the media, and of course they said, no way would we ever do anything like that. it came from one of their UNISERV directors, but they effectively did shut that whole thing down, so they did not show up. The media was on top of it, but they're willing to do anything, I think, basically to see things like this don't expand. And I do believe we have to put parents in charge, and it's just a great tool to move that forward.
Great. You know, I think one of the things that clearly we've heard a lot about today and yesterday is the innovations that are going on in terms of new school models, and blended learning has been a big part of that discussion today. Do you all think that schools that are charters in your states and those that are recipients of vouchers and tax credits have a particularly important role to play in adopting those kinds of new technologies in new school programs, and how, from a legislative standpoint, can that be evaluated with the hope that we can accelerate this whole process into traditional public schools? Would anybody like to comment on that? Because I think what we're all frustrated with is that things aren't moving along more quickly.
Well, first of all, I think that a lot of the choice schools, a lot of private schools, are probably a little bit more willing to try different innovations, and they don't have the entrenched bureaucracy to deal with, and the unions and things like that. It's at least not in Arizona. And so I think that a lot of times they do adopt a lot of the more innovative strategies a little more quickly or a little more readily. But we don't, in Arizona, we don't have our private schools, we don't evaluate them at all, because it's a free market issue for us, and we believe that parents can determine, without the government giving them a metric, whether the school is performing for their child or not, or whether it's a good choice for their child. And so we don't feel like, because they've chosen to go there, they weren't just drawn into a box and this is the school that you get. We trust the parents to make those evaluations rather than having to do it for them. And so, that's a little bit different than some other states, but we've kind of gone with more of the market-based approach when it comes to, giving the parents really all the power.
Yeah, Joe?
Just two quick things. One, in the Education and Savings Accounts bill that I filed, we do require the students that participate in the program to take a national norm referenced standardized test so that we can compare. And I respect both points of view on it, but my view is that if you're getting money from the public, then I want to know how the children are doing. And if the children aren't doing as well as they were in the public school, then I think parents need to know that. And we should just assume that we shouldn't have a double standard. They ought to both have to do testing. And secondly, Senator Lenz here, who has been really the education leader first in the House and in the Senate, and we've actually been able to do a lot of things with our public schools that are innovative, from having career academies to many other programs, so that we're not staying static. And I think that's really been due to her leadership and to a general recognition that kids learn differently, and we've within our public school system actually given parents choices to go to different schools. We have IB programs and a lot of options. But I agree with you that the non-public schools seem to be able to move a little more quickly.
I would also say that we did expanded our virtual charters, and they're obviously going to be the very front edge of the electronic portion or blended portion of education. But as you look, in fact, Melinda Gates talked about last night how her Catholic high school, a teacher went out and got Apple computers many years ago. I think the fact that our charter schools don't have the regulations and that our non-public schools don't have the regulations that many of our public schools are tied down to will give them the ability to go out and be more creative. And the fact that we hold our voucher schools to the state accountability will definitely be able to track performance as well as our charters. So we wanted to make sure that we'd always be able to keep focused on making sure that all students are moving forward regardless of where they are, and especially if state dollars are following those children.
I just want to invite members of the audience, if you have any questions, come on up to this microphone.
Thank you. I'm State Senator Jane Cunningham from Missouri. And Mr. Obendorf, I met you originally in Jackson Hole. Thank you for the years you've put into this. An idea I got actually from Dan Brennan out of Ohio. When you start giving students money to follow them to the private schools, he suggested to me that I put in a bill that says any difference between what they spent on the student in the public school and the lower amount that they may get in a private school, that difference they can put in a savings account for college. That does two things. It incentivizes the parents to look to college, and it also forces the private school not to go outlandish on their tuitions. This is a question, and it started forming in my mind this morning when people started talking about the problem is not the achievement gap, it's the political crap, and it's the number of our colleagues that we've looked at and talked to and said, yeah, Jane, I like your ideas, but my superintendent will kill me in the next election if I vote for your bill. Is there anyone in the country, and you've got several states, and plus Mr. Obendorf may know this, is there anyone that rates us on kid-friendly? I mean, NARAL and MRL rates us, Chamber rates us, unions rate us. Does anybody in the country rate legislators on being kid-friendly in the area of education and have PAC money follow that? And if we don't, can we start it?
Well, I will tell you that the American Federation for Children has been in Indiana, as I said, for several years. They came in under it was originally All Children Matter, and now it's American Federation for Children. I don't know if they give letter grades, but they definitely do very thorough analysis of making sure you are supportive of choice, and they want to make sure that choice is flourish in charters as well as in the voucher programs, but they are committed to making sure that if you make the decision to step out in front of the choice options that that unions and many oppose, that they will be back again and will continue to be funders and making sure that you won't be taken out. Tony Bennett actually happens to be probably the #1 target of NEA in the country today. I've heard that that there's no question that our teachers union as well as the NEA will do everything in their power to take him out, just as a way to show these leaders of change that you may move too far and we'll take you out. And I know that there's a number of groups coming forward that are going to support and be behind them. The one thing I did mention too in our bill, you mentioned the savings. Because we only spend 90% of the state revenue, the 10% that's saved and the 50% actually goes back into our school funding formula and will be used to fund other students in schools. So it was one of the things that some of our rural members could use is saying, hey, I voted for choice. It's not going to happen in my community, but my kids are actually going to get more money out of it because most of the choice is going to happen in urban centers, and we're going to benefit. So it was kind of a two-way street that gave them some political cover and a way to vote for it as well.
Just real quick on that, and this is going to sound a little smart alecky, but it's true. The AEA already claims that they do rate legislators and states based on child friendliness. The unfortunate part of that is the first thing out of their mouth is that they measure it with dollars spent, and growth of dollars spent. And if that's not happening, well, then you're child unfriendly. And we really need to change the terms of the debate, and we're starting to get there, and groups like American Federation for Children are hopefully going to be able to grow into the role of having PAC money and starting to really be able to help change the terms of the discussion. But when I ran for re-election in 2008, my running mate and I, we have 2 House members in each district in Arizona, we were outspent 9-1 by a coalition of unions. Now, thankfully, we're in a district where we were able to defeat that, but the reality is a lot of people are not. A lot of members are not. And so it's really important when and I like the fact that Joe talks about parental choice, and I do that a lot too, because again, you want to have the focus be child-focused, parent-focused, and not bureaucracy-focused and adult-focused. And I think changing the terms of the debate and having some groups that help us do that is really a key to success in the future and getting that synergy to really kind of kick it off.
Well, one of the things, Senator, in South Carolina, we have a foundation called SCRG, South Carolinians for Responsible Government. And I think what they have done, and other states really should look to this group, is that they have sought out those that are choice advocates and helped them in raising money, because you are correct. It's easy if you have local papers, typically they have a more liberal bias. You're churned in and out, and you're put on the hot seat. This group actually comes in, they give you statistics, they help you with raising of funds, because it does take a lot to be able to do that, and sometimes you feel like you're worn out. A second part of what happens, and we dealt with this in charter schools, was trying to remove the argument from the other side. For example, you're in a debate and they say, you know, you've got all these regulations that the public schools must abide by. A charter school or a private school may not. Well, during the tough economic times, what we did in South Carolina was give flexibility back to those school districts. So now we're telling them, tell you what, we'll just remove all of your regulations too. All of a sudden they say, oh yeah, that's good. Well, oh, wait a minute. I mean, you're taking the argument away from them, and I think that's leveling that playing field so that parents can see, and you really are taking the mask off of what they have sought to do, that being the establishment, and letting them know. And I think the public then, and we've seen this in South Carolina, through the help of SCRG, the grassroots is now coming to join you in your cavalry.
As a board member of the American Federation for Children and our C3 is the Alliance for School Choice, the work that we're solely focused upon in terms of the PAC money that we're giving out is we don't care whether it's to Republicans, we don't care whether it's to Democrats, we care where you stand on this issue. And the result of that is, and by virtue of being there cycle after cycle, 84% of those people that we backed got elected in the last cycle in 2010, 84%. And that we will be there the next cycle, and we will be there, you know, when they start going after superintendents and other legislators that have stuck their neck out on this issue. I think that is where, you know, we'll be able to have sustainable progress. But you have to be there cycle after cycle, election cycle, because the opposition's going to be there, and they're very well financed.
Start publishing those ratings, though. Just publish the ratings on everything.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yes.
Peggy Lehner, Ohio State Senate. I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate on some of this stuff here. I think I'm very concerned as we hear all the figures about how American schools are failing and our children are failing and et cetera, that we would back off on that accountability that we are putting in place for our public schools, that we would dare to say that those other schools that people can take tax dollars go to should not be held to be every bit as accountable as the public schools are. We're going to replace one failing system for another. Second question I have, well, that wasn't a question, that was a comment, is directed towards Senator Negron? Negron, okay. We in Ohio also have a bill rather similar to yours that will allow for scholarships for money in between what it costs to send your child to the parochial school and what we're giving you in school funding formula. And this I don't know how yours works, but my concern kind of goes to perhaps what some people are saying to you, that the people will all leave the public schools. Now, the reason I think they would leave the public schools is, why would you keep your child in a public school when you can send them to a school down the street and make money for their college scholarship to do that?
Well, I have to just speak for myself. I wouldn't.
You wouldn't leave your child?
No, absolutely not. I wouldn't leave the public schools. The public schools that our three children attended are wonderful schools. I don't believe that all our schools are failing. I think that's a gross over-exaggeration.
Well, assuming your child is in one of those.
Right. No, I'm just saying, like, I don't come to this conference. I don't come to this issue as a Firestone critic of public education, that everything is bad and dismal. I don't believe that. I think the majority of the teachers do the best they can. They bend over backwards to work. I know in our family's experience. So So I guess I have to answer the question myself. I wouldn't participate in this program that I'm making available to other parents. I would choose not to. I'm very content with the schools that my children attended. I think they got a great education there. I don't want them to go to private school. I don't want to homeschool them. I don't want them online learning at 2 in the morning. I don't want any of that for myself. However, I don't get to make other people's decisions. And so just as in the building where my law firm is, you can go down one floor and there's another law firm that you can use that does the same thing we do. And so we're in competition. And so I just don't take kindly to the argument that, first of all, I think anytime you're using apocalyptic language like all the schools are going to shut down, generally speaking, apocalyptic things very rarely happen, so I don't think it will happen. But two, I think we have to push back against it and say, if that's the state of public education, that it's so bad that the only people that are there are the people that we're keeping in the plantation.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily that they're bad. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I think a few parents will take it.
If I had a choice and I'm scraping by on
Right.
$50,000 a year, and I see an opportunity.
Well, good, then I want to give you that
create money
choice.
for my child's college.
Right.
The person who chooses to keep their child in the public school doesn't have that same
Right.
opportunity to create money for a college fund. So shouldn't they also, if they've made that choice, also be able to obtain $2,000 a year to send their child to college?
You know, I would say that the parent who is electing to not send their kid to a public school is paying taxes and contributing every way that I am, and I don't think it's fair that I get the benefit of having an education for my kids and they don't get anything if they choose to not send their kid to public school. So I look at it as really that parent is making a 60% contribution to everyone else. They're actually being shortchanged somewhat. We probably should give them more. But 40% to me is at least some recognition of the fact that we'll give you some of your money to do your own choice with. But I think if we passed educational savings accounts in Florida, I think several thousand people would participate. Do I think the public schools would drain out? Absolutely not. There's a lot good going on in our public schools. And so
well, the second part of that, though, that I have heard in response to our legislation is that what would keep the parochial schools from raising their tuition to capture the full amount?
And just one last thing, what we said in our bill was this is subject to the General Appropriations Act, so the legislature, if it chooses to, can put a cap on it and can say, we're only going to spend $80 million on this, or we're going to spend $100 million. So we can cap it if we want to. I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't cap it.
And I can tell you, too, we looked at that issue in terms of tuition creep. But the truth is, majority of those, first off, we don't give them enough money to open a new school. It's going to be basically not-for-profits that are going to be doing it, that are the schools that are already there, and most of the students in that school are people who've chosen to send their students there not on vouchers. So all of a sudden, you raise the tuition, it kicks them out of it. So they're not going to all of a sudden, because we do say that it has to be equal. You can't charge a tuition parent different or a voucher parent more than you would charge a tuition parent. So I think that's the argument against tuition creep, is that the market is basically saturated with people who made choice, they had the ability to make choice, and they're not going to raise it.
I think we have time for one last question.
Actually, I just wanted to address one really quick point on what this lady brought up, and that is that it's not just about addressing schools that are failing, because Joe's right, there's a lot of public schools that do a pretty good job. But if no rational parent is going to send their child to a substandard private school just because they can put some money aside for college, because then the child won't be able to go to college. So the reality is, if the parent can get an equivalent or better education at a private school and put money aside for college because of one of these programs, then that means the taxpayers are getting shortchanged because the other school, the public school, is not being run as efficiently. And there's some waste going on there that needs to be addressed. So this is not just an education quality issue, it's also a taxpayer fidelity issue.
Okay, I recall Independent Voices for Better Education from Florida. I just want to address one of the topics that was brought up and like to hear some response. Can you hear me? Okay, is this better?
Yes.
Okay, Ira Paul from Independent Voices for Better Education from Florida. I just have a few questions. One question I want to ask you concerning teacher unions. In right-to-work states like Florida, teacher unions only represent a minority of the teachers. I think in Florida, the numbers would be anywhere from low 30s to mid 30s. But when they speak, they claim to speak for all teachers. You have professional educators associations out there that nobody knows anything about. Why can't we get some of these people in the professional educators associations and other groups to speak for education?
Well, we're a right-to-work state as well, and I think you are absolutely correct, because you are hearing from a few that claim to be all. The interesting thing is, for example, in my district, I keep in touch with my teachers. They're where the rubber meets the road, and I can tell you they do an outstanding job. What happens is the union, if you will, that teachers group tries to come in and usurp some of the authority in what they're talking about. How you combat that really, though, and the Speaker of our South Carolina House has done this, is you amass the base in those contacts for teachers. And you utilize that network to send and receive correspondence, because you're actually, and I had a meeting where I brought in teachers, and of course, many teachers who were both pro-union and anti came, but at least as the public, you get to see what is going on and how these teachers think. Because once you do that, they are more concerned about what's happening in the classroom. And even in our district, when we had tough times economically, teachers told me, I will take less pay and continue to do my job, just try not to lay teachers off. Whereas we had the union teachers and the hierarchy, if you will, within the administration saying, oh, we're going to start furloughing teachers and it's going to be bad for education, when in all reality that did not have to happen. So it's the scare tactic, and I think we combat that with a grassroots approach.
The other thing I would say, in Indiana, we're not a right-to-work state, but we do have about 60% of the teachers represented by the union. One reason they have a voice is because they have money, and they have payroll deductions, and they raise significant amount of PAC money. I think most teachers that belong to the union probably have no idea what's going on at the State House. And the one thing that we did with collective bargaining reform, we changed the way they communicate, because most of the teachers today, the union has exclusive rights over what goes into their mailbox and what communication comes to them. Under our collective bargaining reform, that's eliminated, so Tony has the right to communicate directly to them exactly what we see is happening at State House as opposed to what the state union. And believe me, all session long we were fighting misinformation from the teachers union that they tried to basically eliminate all of those bills moving forward.
All right, well, please join me in thanking our panel.